Hello. A comment on an interesting piece in The Guardian about Prince Andrew, which I highly recommend you find and read. Not to judge him and not to either defend him or chastise him, but just to look at an interesting fact that is brought out in this piece is that Charles, as the crown prince, and now king, but as the crown prince, prior to his coronation, had a budget of 20 million pounds a year, whereas Andrew, his brother, had a budget of 249,000 per year. Now, we're told, to be, with our pitchforks in our hands, we're supposed to be outraged that he would behave so badly on what is, to most of us, an enormous amount of money. Because with 249,000, we have 20,000 a month, which should allow us to support an apartment in a big city and a country house and dinner out to a nice restaurant twice a week and send our kids to college. That's basically what I presume 20,000 a month would get us. That's pretty good. The problem is that Andrew grew up in Buckingham Palace, in Balmoral, in his own residence. He grew up in splendor, absolute splendor, because his mother was the queen, and therefore anything that was needed was available. Meaning, if she wanted to have 40 guests for dinner, it was done, and a beautiful meal was prepared, and the best wine, surrounded by the finest artwork. And this is how Andrew grew up. So when he came of age, it was a rude awakening that his brother had. What are we talking about here? We're talking about 15 times what Andrew had, which means, in effect, that if Charles said, let's all get onto a private plane and go to an island, just the 20 of us closest friends, and go to an island and spend 5 days in splendor with guest houses and wines and dinners and beaches and water sports, cocktails and movies and whatever we wanted, then he could do it. He could snap his fingers and do it the way a billionaire would, because 20 million a year is like the interest on, let's say, 300 or 400 million. So it's almost like being a demi-billionaire, whereas Andrew had what is only regarded in New York as a decent Wall Street salary, not even a significant one, because someone who's a real success on Wall Street is making $1 million a year base, double or thrice that perhaps, after bonuses. So Andrew probably resented the fact that if he wanted to do something, he would probably tag along on a flight. He wouldn't invite 10 friends. He might invite 2 friends. And that's how someone like Epstein became important to him, because Epstein had so much money that, yes, he would go and stay in a splendid house in New York, in that enormous townhouse on the Upper East Side. And then he'd get on a private plane and he'd go to that island where there were beautiful naked girls walking about. And to him, this was his due, but he could not afford it himself. And so even though Andrew was a prince and had 250,000 a year, he felt like the poor relation. And in fact, you could argue that he was. Because if you count yourself as every bit the equal to your brother, and yet your brother is receiving from his mother and the crown 16 times what you're receiving, it must be a blow. Unless he's a philosopher. And Andrew is no philosopher. He seems to be an average man in many ways, an average person in many ways, in his desires and his thoughts, his honesty, his character. He's no better than average. So all of this royal advantage of school and upbringing hasn't benefited him any more than it has Charles or the others that we can see. They just seem to be a normal family that you see on a sitcom. They're an argument against monarchy, in fact. But that's aside from the point. My point is that this shows how money is always the engine of discord, and that it's not how much money, it's how much money proportionally. So the right-wing brigands, the bastards who talk about 30p Lee, or it doesn't even have to be that person, anyone who thinks, oh, this is what a person needs to survive. It's not about surviving. In the modern world, people survive, generally, one way or another. They don't starve in the street, per se. But it is a spiritual starving when you walk through your own neighborhood and you can't walk into a coffee shop and get a coffee and a donut because you're with 3 kids and your wife, and they're going to charge you $3.50 for the coffee and $3.50 for a pastry. And so now you're at 7 times 5. That's $35 to have a coffee and a donut. Whereas other people just blithely walk in, and they blithely walk in and spend $50 per person on a lunch. So that's $200. But there are most people in America who can no longer just walk into a coffee shop, get a cup of coffee, and a donut. In the big cities, I know this to be the case. And where I live, in San Sebastián in northern Spain, a town that was always famous for its pinchos, it's now become something of a Disneyland. Because in the old days, before the euro, when it was pesetas, people would do the ronda, and I'm talking about working class people. 5 friends, they'd go to a bar, they'd have a glass of wine, 100 pesetas, that's 70 cents. They'd have a pincho for 100 pesetas. It's another 70 cents. So they spent $1.50. Then they'd go to another bar and another bar. That's called doing the ronda, the round. 3 or 4 bars, 3 or 4 pinchos and a wine. Then they walk around and talk, and then they go to supper. They go to a restaurant and have some supper. Nobody does that anymore. Why? Because the tourism has been so important that the prices have exploded. And now, well, not just with the euro. With the euro, there was an immediate jump because they took advantage. I forget the economic term for this, but in small purchases, there's a jump when there's a currency change. So when they went to the euro, suddenly 100 pesetas for a small beer became €1. But that was actually an increase of about 40%. But then the prices started going up higher and higher because they marketed San Sebastián as this special destination. And there were a couple of bars that offered pinchos that were high gastronomy, basically 3-star cooking for a pincho, for a tapa. There's a place called Cuchara de San Telmo, and they would charge $2.50, which was considered a lot, double a normal price for a tapa, but it was so special. It would be carrillera, beef cheek in a wine sauce with a little bit of bone marrow, and it was absolutely superb with a piece of bread. And then you'd get an excellent wine for $2.50, and you spend €5. But it was special. But then all the other bars started to copy them, and so now all the pinchos are $2.50, $3.50, but they're just pinchos. A pincho, a proper pincho in San Sebastián is a slice of salmon on a piece of toast with maybe an anchovy on it, or a little guindilla on it, or something like that. And that no longer is something that people here can afford to do the ronda before supper, because they wind up spending so much money that now they say, let's go straight to dinner. So who is eating the tapas? Who is eating the tapas in the bars? French, who have a higher standard of living. They spend a half hour coming. They come here and then they don't spend a lot of money on their food. Americans, certain kind of American, not the best kind of tourists. A lot of Trump voters, actually, people who make money and like safety. They don't want to see different races of people. They love the fact that San Sebastian is quiet and pretty and simple and the food's delicious and everybody's white, more or less. I think that's what it is, but I meet a lot of Trump people walking around. Nobody very interesting, except for us. So there you have it. You have tourists eating the tapas. So the tapas are no longer for us. They're not for the Donostiadas. You go to the old part and it's just completely tourist and no Donostiadas. The Donostiadas are home, or they go out to supper maybe, but even there, they're not doing that. So to get back to Andrew, it's not just how much money you have relative to the price of bread, all of that's important. It's how much you have compared to everybody else. And when a person feels poor, too poor to go into a coffee shop and get a coffee and a pastry with his 3 kids, when it costs him too much money to get a chicken dinner, then we have a problem, a very serious problem. And so let us understand that Andrew's conduct, in which he was ceding his reputation, he was ceding the crown's honor to people who had the money to make him feel that he was on the same level as his brother. Now you see, he was tested and he failed, but he was tested for financial reasons. And that is the power of money. And that is why I'm a socialist. That's why I believe that it's important, as Bernie Sanders would say, that there should not be any billionaires. I always remember what Roseanne Barr said. Who needs more than $100 million? Now that's a fact. If you had $100 million, think about what you would do with it. And think about if there's anything that you couldn't do with it, that you really would want. And if that's the case, then we need to eliminate these great fortunes, because they make everybody, and in fact, they do make everybody, in fact, weaker. And what we want is a general health and strength. So let's follow the Northern European model of high taxes, taxes that eliminate great fortunes, and that's what we had. That's what we had. When I was 3 years old, the top marginal tax rate was 91% on big money. And now it's, 35%? Won't do.